Great. So what I'm proposing to do over the next half an hour is give everyone a bit of a whistle-stop tour through various different bits and bobs around Islamic finance and investing. And the idea here is that this should hopefully give you a bit of a lie of the land, but then you can go over it afterwards via the website or via your own research to find out more about this. But what I want to leave you with is just a sense of the various different aspects that you can keep in mind. The first and foremost thing that I want to touch upon is like why do we care about this stuff? And the reason why we care about this stuff is because on the day of judgment, one of the five things that we'll be questioned on is our wealth, and how we earned it and how we spent it. And this is something that we often neglect really properly thinking about in a lot of detail, and unfortunately, this is a major failing on our part. So we need to do this, and actually, wealth is something that is inextricably tied up with the human condition, and the more wealth that a community has, typically the stronger they also are. And the Muslim community, sadly, we're 20% poorer than the rest of the world. And that has a whole host of impacts. So it has health outcomes. We've seen that in COVID. We live in the poorest areas. There's a higher contagion rate. We've got all sorts of other health outcomes that come as a result of poor diet, poor education around diet. You have media underrepresentation. You've got political underrepresentation. You've got prison overrepresentation. You've got no one in academia. Muslims are not present in culture. We grew up reading Harry Potter and J.K. and Dick King Smith, but there isn't any Muslims that occupy the mental waves, the mind waves of young people growing up. And all of these things are, at least in part, related to the economic condition of a particular community. And the reason why we care about this is because, if the Muslim community, I'll give you another idea about this. Out of the top 100 companies in the world, publicly listed companies in the world, there should be at least 25 of them that are Muslim, if it's proportionate to the population size. There's actually just one, and that's Aramco as well. So that's an oil company. And then you look in the next 100 companies, and there's only one again, and that's Sabic, and that's an offshoot of Aramco, which is their gas division. So, Muslims are pretty weak when it comes to their, economic position. And if we are complaining about, the way that the media covers us, the way that politicians treat us, the oppression of the Uyghurs, what have you, if we're talking about these things and we're not really thinking about, really substantive ways to address that, one of which is economic, then I think we're not necessarily being fully honest with ourselves. So this is, why we're talking about this topic in the first place, and this is why I've made this my life mission. And then the final thing is, of course, it actually makes you money, right? This is I'm preaching the good news gospel here, because what you're going to get out of this is you're going to get some money out of it. So it's actually a good thing. So what I'm going to do today is really quickly whiz you through four kind of key personal finance frameworks, three essentials of investing, and then we'll have a look through some of the main investment categories. Islamic Finance Guru, I think most of you probably know who we are, but we're an Islamic finance comparison analysis website. Think of us like the Muslim money saving expert. And as I said, our mission is that we want to help Muslims everywhere get wealthier. And we want to do that by helping them with their personal finances, matching up them with the right investments, and also helping Muslim entrepreneurs as well. And we're going to focus on the first one of those today. So 4 tiers of personal finance. Personal finance, what actually is it? Personal finance is everything to do with your money, your going ins, your going outs, what your debts, where you're spending it, how you're holding that money, everything to do with your money. And if it's done well and in a strategic way and in a sensible way, it can actually be a fair bit of fun. And obviously the fruits of money can, they can definitely be pleasurable. So that's what personal finance is. The four tiers of personal finance that we should be focusing on. And firstly, get yourself a budget. Make sure that you are understanding that, if you spend more than you are earning, then you are going to at some point run into trouble. I know it sounds like a really simple point, but sadly, many of us don't actually know if they are spending more than they're earning. Particularly if you, often with students, you have a large bank of student debt or some kind of parental a gift or something to fall back on. You don't actually fully realize that every month you're eating away at your savings. So that's the first thing. Sort yourself a budget out, clear your debts, especially those that are interest bearing. Of course, we shouldn't have those in the first place, but if you do, clear those first. And then after that, you should have a 3 to 6 month buffer in case something weird and wonderful happens, which causes ruptures in the world. So, for example, I don't know, like a bat in China could pass a flu onto someone, and then that could, I don't know, spread to the rest of the world and cause a global lockdown, for example. I know it sounds fantastic, but it could happen, and that would necessitate you having a 3 to 6 month buffer in terms of your savings. And then what you should do after that is try and get yourself out of the rent cycle, because when you're renting, then you're losing money every month. And typically it's often better for you to buy. And it's not always the case. So we have a should I buy or should I rent calculator on our website, which you should check out. But if it is the case that you should buy, then of course you should try and buy as soon as you possibly can, using either a shared ownership scheme or an Islamic mortgage, or buying in cash. They're the three halal ways of buying a house. Then you should build a diversified portfolio. This is actually,
apologies, Ibrahim. I think just for maybe the last 10 seconds, the internet connection wasn't good. If we just repeat what was said.
Yeah, sure. So I was just saying that try and avoid renting for too long, because that is just money down the drain, and you should try and get yourself onto the housing ladder, because then you're actually investing in that house, and you'll come out of it over 20, 30 years of that life of that Islamic mortgage, about £200,000, £300,000, £400,000 ahead what you would otherwise. And then the final thing is after that, which is really the purpose of the rest of this presentation, is building a diversified portfolio that can achieve the different investment goals that you have. Maybe we can talk a little bit about investment goals. Investing without any set objective is a bit dangerous, and it's a bit aimless. It's like getting into the car and just driving for the hell of it. You can do it, but it's not necessarily, and you'll probably end up somewhere. But if you don't have an objective behind it, then it doesn't seem like a very sensible thing to do, and you probably want to achieve that objective unless you actually set out to go there. Spending matrix. If you are skint, the two questions that you ask yourself are, do I need it and can I afford it? And if the answer to that is no and no, then don't buy it. If you are not skint, then the questions are, will I use it and is it worth it? And if the answer to those are no and no, then don't buy it. I know it sounds simple, but actually, you know what? Most of us don't think of this when we buy stuff. Spend in a savvy way. For students in particular, don't eat out too much. I know that there is a particular class of Isoc, and I was possibly one in my time, that is fond of the takeaways and the curry mile and what have you. And I know Wilmslow Road in particular in Manchester is a big fitna for people, but do try and resist the temptation as much as you can, and make sure that you're doing a regular direct debit health check as well, to make sure that any regular spending that you have that you actually don't use, for example, gym memberships during COVID or whatever it might be, then make sure that you're just checking in on those and making sure that every 3 to 6 months you're cleaning out the ones that aren't appropriate or relevant. I'll whiz through this really quickly, but the point of this slide really is that your entire life, if you are, you need to be switched on about your personal finances. And if you make some good moves early doors, then you will avoid some painful things later on. So for example, if your parents had saved just 50 quid a month since you were born, then most of you wouldn't have needed to get a student loan out. You would have been able to pay off your student loan, your entire university fees, just because of those savings. So maybe that's a lesson for the road for your kids, perhaps. The other thing that you should do is make sure you get a pension when you get your first job, and then when it comes to, as you grow older and you have more assets, start thinking about, your Islamic will, because without a will, your money will be distributed according to English law, which is, a haram distribution. And that will cause you trouble in the akhirah, because, the last action you did when you were leaving was getting your money distributed according to a law other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's. So not a good look when you're turning up, on the Day of Judgment. And then the other thing, oh, by the way, on the pension side of things, we have a campaign at the moment where if anyone here is working and you don't have a pension, Islamic pension available at your workplace, then drop us a line. We're currently campaigning hard with the government and various others to try and get this changed. So let us know. The more data points that we have, the better it is. Okay, cool. Let's move on. So the 3 essentials of investing. The first is actually invest. And the second one is invest like the 1%. Now, people often think that, oh, brother, I'm not investing because I'm just weighing up my options at the moment. No, what you're actually doing is you are investing, but your portfolio allocation is 100% to cash. Cash is something that is going down at a rate of about 2% inflation every year. And if you leave £50,000 just due to cash and zakat over the course of 10 years, it will dwindle down to £10,000. So, actually investing is a pretty good idea. Like, people think that, oh, just me holding in cash is the safest thing ever. No, it's not. It's actually, it's worse for you in the long run if you just do that. And then the 1%, how do they invest? The 1% invest in 3 key ways. They invest in a consistent and regular way, they diversify, and they have long-term time horizons. What do I mean by each of these? Well, the first thing is they diversify. So on the right, you can see how the 1% invest, and on the left, you can see how the ordinary person invests. And the immediate thing you notice is that the 1%, they invest in lots of different things, some of which you might not even have heard of. So real estate, private equity, venture capital, hedge funds, what's going on there. So in 1% people, they typically diversify much, much more broadly, and they have access to investments that give them a lot of really strong growth. So things like private equity, hedge funds, venture capital, even to some extent real estate, they all give some really aggressive growth, which here, on the other hand, in ordinary person's portfolio, you don't really have. So diversification is super important, and getting into those kind of asset classes that the 1% invest in is also important, and it is now possible. And you can find out more on our website. And then you notice how over a long period of time, Warren Buffett was quite consistent. If Warren Buffett had pulled the plug at 43 and said, you know what, I'm going to retire. I've had enough, 34 million, it's been a good run. See you later, lads. If he did that, then he probably wouldn't be someone we know about today. As it is, he's got fairly sizable pot of money. And what happens is money has this habit of snowballing. So just being consistent and regular with investing and just sticking at it can reap major, major returns over the long run. And then, the reason why long-term time horizons are a good thing is because, generally speaking, if you look at, the stock market over the last 30, 40, 50, 60 years, it has always trended upwards because of various different reasons like inflation and what have you. So, and progress in the world as well. So just having long-term time horizons allows you to almost sidestep any of the noise that you see in the market. So for example, if you had invested in 1976 and you exited in 2000, you'd have done pretty well. So, having long-term time horizons is generally speaking a good thing. Okay, cool. So 5 investment categories. The first one, everyone's favorite, is stocks and shares. So there are a few different ways that you can invest in stocks and shares. The first is by doing it yourself. I mean, I'm kind of ignoring the options on this page and just going kind of off piste here. But the first is doing it by yourself, just buying individual stocks and shares, which are small stakes in publicly listed companies, and just owning them. Now, this means that you are going to have the discernment and expertise to actually buy stocks and shares according to some kind of insight that you have, so that you may make sure that you actually buy an appropriate one. Most people don't necessarily have that. So perhaps a lot of people will go for the second option, which is just buying some kind of Islamic fund or funds via a broker. Then you've got something that's even less hands-on, which is going for a robo-advisor, someone like Agaz Invest, Wahid Invest, Sarwa, Coco Invest, others, where you are just handing over the money to them, and they'll just kind of automatically manage all of that money and put it into various funds and tweak it and what have you. So those are the broad areas. And then, of course, you've got financial advisors for high net worth individuals. And for all of us, pensions also will have give us some exposure to stocks and shares as well. Sukuk are the Islamic equivalent of bonds. So bonds are a fixed income return. They give a percentage interest every year. And sukuk create a similar effect, but using rent on property and other assets such as that. And you can buy them, broadly speaking, in similar areas, because a lot of them are, you'll buy them via a sukuk fund of some sort. And there are some sukuk available via the IFG website as well. So that's sukuk. Then you've got property. So with property, obviously it's a massive investment, because properties are pretty large, pretty expensive. Even in some of the cheapest places, they're tens of thousands of pounds. So the way to get into property for quite cheap is by property crowdfunding, using people like Yielders or Ethis or others as well. Then you can invest in land, which is a stage before the property actually even gets built, and you can invest in land via intro crowd. All of these, by the way, are on the website, so no worries, don't worry about having to write them all down. Then you can also buy certain REITs, which are Islamic, and you can also just, if you have the money, buy your own property. So that's like the DIY way of doing that. And of course, if you do that, then get yourself an Islamic mortgage whilst you do it. Broadly speaking, let me just go through all of these, and then I'll give a bit of a sense in terms of how you should split your portfolios. Savings accounts, they it says what it it says on the tin, does what it says on the tin. They are a savings account. They will give you like a 1.5%, 2% return on your savings. Very, very safe, very, very boring, and sometimes very necessary as part of your investment strategy. And then you've got private companies. So this is the stuff that gets me excited. So you've got two broad ways that you can invest in private companies. One is equity-based, and the other one is debt-based. So certain companies need equity investing. So things like startups. So a Facebook or a Google or an Amazon. Early days, they raised equity funding so that they sold a percentage of the company to a venture fund or to angel investors, and then they grew the company with that money. And IFG.VC and other syndicates like us, we invest in early stage startups, and we do exactly that. So that's a way that you can get exposure to this field. And if you have smaller amounts of money to invest, then maybe crowdfunding websites could be another alternative to explore as well. And then you've got SME financing. So this is where you give loans, Sharia compliant loans, to private companies. So like a dentist or a pharmacist might need a loan of, I don't know, £200,000, and they'll pay you a percentage, 10% per annum as a return on that loan. And it's obviously structured in a Sharia compliant way. So they're nice ways of investing into private companies. And this is, I think, the most impactful kind of investment, because the investment itself is actually going to add real value to the world and help often Muslim entrepreneurs really kick on and try and do big things. So really, really excited about this whole space. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, what we've been talking about. and how Muslims can get richer, which is by sorting out your personal finances. I just just some thoughts around how you structure your portfolio. So typically, you want to have like a broadly speaking 40-40-20 rule, where and look, for every person it's different. It depends on your risk appetite and your experience and everything like that. But broadly speaking, about 40% of your portfolio could be in stocks, about 40% could be in fixed income stuff, so things that are giving a steady return, but it doesn't necessarily have that much capital growth. And then about 20 odd percent in alternative assets. So these are typically higher growth assets, but also a bit more higher risk. And also just other random assets will fit into this category as well. So things like cryptocurrencies and what have you would fit into this category because they're typically higher risk, higher growth assets. And then of course, it varies from person to person, but you could, if you are a bit more conservative, go a bit heavier on the fixed income stuff because that's traditionally a bit safer. And because it's asset backed by some kind of property and it gives you a return, but your capital doesn't necessarily increase every year. Whereas if you are younger and a bit more aggressive, then you might decide, I want to have a bit more alternative assets. I'm going to put a lot more into startups or cryptocurrency or something along those lines. In terms of some other broad areas that I think are relevant for students, student loans, try and pay those off, try and avoid it as much as you can for a start. If you do have to take one out, then try and pay it off as soon as you possibly can, because that's closer to taqwa. Try and take, if you can, try and take gap years and work during your gap year and use it to reduce your student loan down, but also gain a lot of really vital experience. And then after you finish university, try and pay it off as soon as you possibly can, and work during university as well. Because my view is that student loans are not necessarily the best thing to do, permissible, or something to avoid unless you're really, really in dire straits. So that's kind of high level advice. In terms of trying to get into Islamic finance as a career, which is often a question that comes up fairly regularly, I would say that the first thing that you should do is just gain corporate experience, mainstream corporate experience, and show that you have an expertise or an interest in Islamic finance in some way, shape, or form via perhaps your extracurricular activities, or some kind of writing that you've done for the corporate that you work at, or some other way that you can show. And then I think you'd be in a good position to potentially embark upon a career in Islamic finance. You just need to keep your eye out and talk to the right people, and hopefully you'll get yourself somewhere. And then I think the other thing that often people ask is about entrepreneurship. If they are that way minded, then my thoughts on this are that if you can, taking a year out of taking a gap year, or taking a kind of a year out after university before you actually dive into like corporate life, and just by experimenting, and if you think you've got an idea and you want to like make it really work, then it's a great time to experiment and try and do that startup thing. Because if it clicks and it takes off and you're passionate and you're hardworking about it, then you can be you can be very, very rich in about 10 years time. If it doesn't, then you've not lost anything. You can always just go back to KPMG or Deloitte or wherever it is that you end up, and then you can maybe perhaps try again. But entrepreneurship is not something for everyone. Only for those people who actually really are interested in it should probably try it. And then I'd also recommend actually people work in startups, because it gives you really vital skills that you won't really gain from the corporate life. So try and work for a well-funded startup early doors, because you learn a lot about various different bits of culture and innovation and moving fast and the cutting edge of technology. So these are all things that I'd suggest people have a think about and a look at when it comes to their own their own careers. I know that's a lot of information to take in. So what we do, we have like a free crash course when you subscribe to our website, and it just sends you like emails one after another, which just breaks it all down, and you can digest it in a much more pithy and calmer way than me staccato gunfire at you for the last 35 minutes. And then of course we have Telegram chat groups as well, which are very active, and lots of thousands of people on there. Actually, one of them was so active that we put it on the naughty corner today because there was just too many messages. So there we have it. So you should join that. And that's it from my side. Love to hear your thoughts and questions. Jazakallah khair.
Jazakallah khair for an informative talk. What we are doing now is putting a link in the chat. We want to be able to answer the most pertinent questions that they have. It's sli.do/isoc for you to pose your questions, and we might as well make a beginning. The first is advice on paying back student loan. What is your advice for paying back student loan?
Try and do it as quickly as you can, but obviously don't kill yourself in the process. So what I'm not saying is that you should live in a tent and sleep in a sleeping bag in in a park somewhere. You should get married, you should have your usual life, but if you are able to just accelerate a bit of the repayment, then that's a good thing. But don't put yourself in hardship as a result of that either.
Okay, next on the list is it unrealistic to think that the stock market will have continuous upward growth?
History suggests otherwise, and I think partly this is the reason is because our money supply is it's a function of debt creation. So inflation is an inherent built-in thing within our money supply. So there isn't at any point there isn't enough money in the world to pay off all the debt in the world. So you need to create more debt, more money supply to actually pay off the previous debt. So that's a very long and technical reason for why stock markets, generally speaking, continue rising upwards. And I'm not saying, by the way, this is over like 5 years or even 10 years. I'm saying this is over 30 years or 40 years. So investing early and just holding for a long period of time is typically a good thing. If you've already taken out student sorry, I'm on it. I've realized your game. I realized that all you're doing is moving one up. So I beat you to it. If I've already taken out a student loan for my first year, what would you advise? What would I advise? It's the same advice, really. Like if you desperately need it, then so be it, right? You need it. There is obviously the fatwa of people like Sheikh Haytham, who regard student loans as not necessarily permissible. And if you're comfortable with that view, then of course avail of that view as well. My personal view and the view of some scholars that I talk to is that it's probably not something that is ideal and should be avoided as much as you possibly can, and make efforts to try and minimize it by perhaps taking a gap year and working in the industry and making some money that way, because that will not only reduce the loan, but also it will increase your employability afterwards. So yeah, those were my thoughts. And try and work during university. Don't just chill out at Chicken Cottage and whatever it is that students these days do. I think that's what we did mainly, chill out at Chicken Cottage. So whatever it is that you're doing, which is is kind of a bit of a waste of time, try and do less of that and try and do more of something productive that will potentially make you some money, and at least show Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you're trying your best to try and get out of this situation. What's a safe method to invest in stocks, as in how to tell if they are halal? What's the guidance on this? So the best way to work this out is by learning how to screen stocks from an Islamic perspective yourself, and then doing that. We've got a, sorry, someone spoke?
No, no.
Okay. Well, we've got a free article that does it, and then we've got a course as well that takes you through it. And then there's apps like Zoya and Islamically and others as well, that give you a bit of a sense on, you know, if it's halal or not. My view is that doing it yourself is the best thing. And if you're going to invest in individual stocks, then you kind of owe it to yourself to do enough due diligence to be able to actually open the annual report of that company and properly read it to understand what you're investing in. Otherwise, you're really just investing blind, and that's not really how you should be investing in the first place when it comes to individual stocks. If you're not willing to put in the time to do that, then actually what you should do is probably just invest in a Wahid Invest or an Islamic fund and just, you know, be done with it that way. But if you want to do it yourself, then, you know, do it properly. And so apps like Zoya and Islamically are good as an initial check, but they can and do sometimes, you know, get it wrong. So you should, you know, I use Zoya. I actually use the Financial Times, their screeners in the back end, and that gives me a good initial sense of whether or not this thing could be halal or haram. If it's like way off like haram, then fine, I won't like look into it any further. But if it is potentially halal, then I'll do my own screen to make sure that it is halal. Wouldn't investing in charity be better than investing in stocks? So I don't know if saying that investing in charity is the right phrase, because an investment is where you put money in and you get money back out, right? And charity is where you just give money. Of course, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he encourages us to give charity, um, and he encourages us in many places in the Quran about charity. So that's obviously a good thing, but it's not an investment strategy. If someone decided as part of my investment strategy, I'm going to give 90% away every year, then, you know, I don't know if that's a prudent investment strategy. وَالَّذِينَ إِذَا أَنفَقُوا لَمْ يُسْرِفُوا وَلَمْ يَقْتُرُوا وَكَانَ بَيْنَ ذَلِكَ قَوَامًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he says that, well, those who spend, they don't do israf, they don't go like mad, but then they're not also miserly. There's somewhere in the middle between those two things. What kind of percentage is deemed high return, and what kind of average is a healthy percentage? It depends on your risk. So low risk investments typically make somewhere between 1 and 2 or 3%. Medium risk investments make somewhere between 3 and like 7 or 8%, and then high risk investments are typically those that make somewhere between 8 and double-digit returns. And the higher the investment amount goes, probably the more high risk it is. So that's something to just bear in mind. Aren't student loans considered graduate taxes as they don't have a normal circumstances of a loan? Yeah, that's the view of scholars like Sheikh Haytham. So if you want to avail of that and you're comfortable with that view, then feel free to rely on that view. That's not necessarily the view of other scholars, and I'm more inclined to their perspective. I have 2 questions, please. Is investing in crypto allowed? Yes, as long as a cryptocurrency is allowed. IslamicFinanceGuru.com/crypto is a Sharia screen of the top 50 cryptocurrencies by market size. So you can check that out. Is longing with that leverage in a futures market allowed? No. Futures typically are not allowed, and leverage is typically not allowed. The longing bit is fine, but then the other 2 bits are not. They'll be problematic. But isn't the term rent just disguising the usual interest that is charged? So I think my view is that ultimately no is the answer to that. If you are replicating a conventional mortgage where interest is charged, and you structure it in a different way where it becomes something to do with rent, then yeah, economically it might look parallel because that's what you've set out to achieve. You've set out to achieve a similar, if not identical, economic outcome. But where the difference will typically lie is in the risk that you are associated in, that you are exposed to. So a bank actually owns that property, whereas a bank doesn't necessarily own a property when it has a conventional mortgage, because you own the property and it's a loan that you owe the bank. Whereas in an Islamic mortgage, the bank owns the property and they will ultimately sell it back to you, and you transfer it to your name once you've paid everything all off. So I think this is, if you watch my video, that's I don't know how much more I can really say on this front. Perhaps have a read of our review of Ar-Rayyan and Gatehouse Bank as well. That would be maybe helpful for you in understanding the legal paperwork behind it. So we went through all the different legal paperwork and shared our thoughts on that. So you can be challenged more and rewarded more financially too. I work in telecoms as a graduate. I want to get into a higher pay grade after my grad scheme. Most sexy things investigate into how you can be challenged more and rewarded more financially too. I honestly don't know the answer to that. I think, just look for, you can make money in every field really, but if you look for growth areas, so like artificial intelligence, machine learning, cryptocurrency, fintech, blockchain technologies, medtech, climate change, these are all growth areas. So, getting into something like that could be potentially quite a good idea. When choosing stocks to invest in there, is there options such as Zoya and Islamically? What other options are there, and what do I do if a stock I invested in becomes non-Sharia compliant due to finance-related issues such as debt? The other options are just do it yourself and learn how to do it. It is possible. Like, we've got a free article online on this, and we've got a course as well. So there are options available for you to work it out. And what do I do if my stock becomes non-Sharia compliant? Typically, there's a grace period of about 3 to 6 months that most scholars allow, and then after that, they say you should probably exit that. Any profits that you make after the point that it became non-permissible, you give those away. How can we get started with investing? What apps or websites would you recommend? I would recommend Islamic Finance Guru, of course, but also I think that there are lots of websites like NerdWallet and the Rich Dad Poor Dad, the book. I think the best way to get started with investing is to actually just start investing. Put money into something, small amounts of money, and that will get you off the fence and into the field. And once you're in the field, the amount of learning that you have there is going to be massively more than if you were sat on the sidelines just thinking about investing. It's very different when you're actually doing it, because you learn a lot more. What are your thoughts on the current, any advice on how to go about making passive income? So there's a smart passive income blog and podcast and website that you might want to check out to get some ideas. I think that it's an area that you should do your own research, because for different people the different things are right. For some people, passive income looks like actually quite active with setting up a side business income, which is what the smart passive income guy does. But then for other people, passive income is genuinely passive income, where they just invest in a property and it kind of gives them a rental return. So have a think about what you want from what you mean by passive income and what you're trying to get out of it, and then optimize for that. Book recommendations. Hello. What are your thoughts on current rate of quantitative easing and its potential effect on inflation and the economy as a whole post-COVID? Smashed it, whoever's asked this question. I have long ago left my micro and macroeconomic books behind, and to be honest, look, I can give you my random thoughts on this, but obviously take these with a pinch of salt. I think quantitative, I don't know what the current rate of quantitative easing is. But I know that the government is obviously being very aggressive with its fiscal policy right now, and I think that will have, to some extent, obviously a effect of raising inflation. But I think overall, because the market is in such a such doldrums right now, I suspect it doesn't, that kind of cancels out any potential effect on inflation, and I think the economy as a whole will benefit from being propped up during this period, because I think it could have been, working from destruction upwards is often a lot harder than, working from something that is still alive but barely, and getting that back to shape. So yeah, those will be my thoughts. Some scholars argue that interest is only charged on cash and not commodities. Therefore, it is okay to mortgage a house or finance a car as long as the one price is agreed and there is no penalty on delayed repayment. What is your view? So the if you are doing a straight up murabaha where someone has sold you a house and you are going to pay that house you're going to buy that house for £180,000 over the course of the next 10 years instead of £150,000 now, that is permissible. But that is not what's going on in a conventional mortgage, because with a conventional mortgage, what is happening is Bob is selling his house to Jim, and Jim is taking out a mortgage, i.e. a loan, in order to finance that house. So what Jim is doing is he's borrowing that money and he's buying the house from Bob, and he's paying the money back to the bank over the next 10, 20 years. Now, if the bank had bought the property off Bob and said, you know what, now I own the property, now I will sell it to you, Jim, for £180,000, and you just pay me back over the course of the next 20 years, that is perfectly permissible, and that's called a murabaha mortgage. And there are such mortgages available, I believe, in the Middle East. I don't think not so common in the UK. That's perfectly permissible, but it's a different kind of Islamic mortgage as opposed to just a straight up mortgage. As long as you are not doing tax evasion, which is illegal, if you are tax planning, that is legal, then that is perfectly fine. The government says that as well, right? As long as it's legal and it's not aggressive tax planning going on where you're actually borderline, illegal, then it's perfectly fine. So, for example, if the government encourages it, in fact. So if you invest in startups in the UK, you often get some very generous tax breaks where, if all of your investments, like your £10 million worth of your estate, is all invested in startups, not necessarily a sensible thing to do, but let's say it is, all of that is tax-free. Whereas if it was just in cash or other things, 40% of it would be taxed and £4 million would be paid to HMRC. But the government is happy with that because they know that overall, this will ultimately lead to a more thriving and, prosperous economy, and consequently, the government is happy to do that.